Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chen Misgav, and I'm very thankful to the organizer, to Ido and Ofa and Jad and all the others for inviting me to chair this session about atmospheres of violence. During the last 2 years, I'm supervising a PhD student in the Technion that works on queer atmospheres in the public spheres. So both the concept of atmosphere and the subject of violence is very related to my own work, and thus I'm very happy to be here. And I'm very looking forward to hear the three papers. I already read them. They are very interesting. I'm quite sure that in a live presentation it will be even better. So let's jump directly to the first speaker, Leonidas Koutsoumpos, right? I hope I pronounced it correct. So Leonidas Koutsoumpos is assistant professor of theory and architectural design at the School of Architecture at the National Technical University of Athens, Greece. Teaching design studio and theoretical courses. He's also taught in Patras, Greece, and Edinburgh, Scotland. He graduated in Athens, where he also accomplished a postgraduate degree in theory and philosophy of architecture. Being awarded a fellowship by the Greek State Scholarship Foundation, he accomplished his doctoral degree in architecture at the University of Edinburgh. His PhD was awarded the RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects, President's Award of Research, Outstanding PhD thesis of 2009. His research has been exploring theoretical and practical aspects of architectural design. So let's have 20 minutes per person, okay? And I will show you the amount of time left.
So hi everyone. My name is Leonidas and I'm coming from the scientific field of architecture. First of all, I would like to thank very much the generosity of the organizers, not only for the practicalities, but also for securing a space and time for us to be together without parallel sessions and overcrowded audience. And I feel that the peaceful intimacy, despite the heated debate that we are starting now, is not common actually in the highly competitive academic world that we live in. Moreover, despite of what I will say today, please consider me as a rather pacifist. Very often I find violence and confrontation disturbing. I'm sorry to being personal now, but my psychotherapist thinks is not very happy with this and thinks that because he thinks that every human action response can be categorized in three terms. It should be either fight, freeze, or flee, right? And he thinks that I should be more in the fight mode than more often. So here I am presenting, talking about violence, and we'll see, is it just talking or practicing? We'll see about this. So today I'm going to discuss with you the concept of political violence and the ways that it becomes apparent in the urban scene. As a case study, I'm going to use the rather peaceful city, Athens, Greece, by focusing on one neighborhood called Exarchia that actually is not so peaceful. Exarchia is an infamous part of the city known for social misbehavior, drugs, and especially political riots that often escalate in armed clashes with the police. Here, I'm going to focus only on the political violence that takes place in the area. Especially during the late economic crisis that hit Greece extremely hard, violence in Exarchia escalated in an unprecedented degree. And the neighborhood often was assimilated with Asterix, a small Gallic village that ever escapes the omnipresent Roman rule. A basic research question that I'm going to discuss today is why all this happening in this particular part of the city. In order to answer this question, my paper will trace the genealogy of violence in the neighborhood by presenting some key moments in the urban development of Exarchia in relationship to the development of the city of Athens. Finally, I will focus on the most current examples of silent violence that is taking place right now through a profound gentrification process that is under development in the area. What is striking in the case of Exarchia is that the state's repressive violence and the resisting violence carried out by groups and individuals are inseparably interlinked. The paper offers thus a case of continuous resistance that puts in question the very nature of state and continuous fight the fire with fire. Paradoxically, we appear to live on one of the most peaceful periods in recent history, but recently, according to the UN, we globally face a new era of conflict and violence. Although after the Second World War, the absolute numbers of deaths has been declining, conflict and violence are rising. In a recent report, the UN argues, and I quote, the regionalization of conflict which interlinks political, socioeconomic, and military issues across borders has seen many conflicts become longer, more protracted, and less responsive to traditional forms of resolution. Moreover, new technologies like the AI play an important role in enhancing cyber, physical, biological violence, with social media becoming a great platform for disseminating incitement to violence. Despite the numerical indexes that seem to define the problem in absolute terms, academics who want to be precise in defining violence, and we have a lot here today, they find themselves in trouble since it is actually a very complicated term. In the beginning of the 20th century, back in 1906, the French theorist of anarchism and syndicalism, Georges Sorel, was stating that even for the best informed socialist, violence still remains a very obscure topic. Hannah Arendt, in her seminal book on violence, was describing, again, what Sorel remarked 60 years ago is as true today as it was then. Today, despite the various attempts to quantify the various appearances of violence, arguably we are not progressed much in terms of theoretical and philosophical background, and I hope this conference will help into progressing our knowledge and understanding of the topic. So I will attempt an archaeology of violence by visiting first ancient Greek mythology. Violence was represented as Via, the personification of force and strength. Via was the daughter of Titan Pallas and Oceanid Styx, and her brother was Kratos, that in modern Greek language still today means state. Via and Kratos appear for the first time in Hesiod's Theogony, while in Aeschylus' play Prometheus Bound, she and her brother bring Prometheus captive to Hephaestus, helping him to chain the Titan to the rock of Caucasus, and I quote, so that he may learn to bear with the sovereignty of Zeus and cease his man-loving ways, end of quote. Here we can see that from the very beginning, violence has strong ties with state power and force. Ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus emphasized on the importance of violent confrontation. Unity, for him, is always the outcome of a strife, what he called eris, between oppositional processes. For this, it is strife that brings in justice. Moreover, he is famously quoted to suggest that war is the father of all and the king of all. War is central in Heraclitus' philosophy, crossing not only the epistemology of physics and metaphysics, but also his philosophy of ethics. In his view, peace makes sense only in contrast to a situation that it is absent, where war, even as a concept, is present. One of the first treatises in the modern era that explain politics and handling of violence goes back to Thomas Hobbes, who argued that violence is the background of politics, since before any political struggle, everyone would seek to destroy and subdue one another, making life solitary, nasty, and short. Submitting the power of violence to the state, who would then have the monopoly of violence, was the only solution for him. His 1651 book, Leviathan, represents exactly this imminent force that is submitted to one ruler with unprecedented power. Note also the way that the original illustration of the book, people have turned their faces, they're all looking towards the one ruler, and they become faceless. In 1668, Hobbes wrote a less-known sequel book called Behemoth that shows through the example of English civil war of the time what happens when the very worst abuses of state power become the predominant violent way. Coming back to some contemporary advances in violence, it is important to note that physical violence is only one aspect of the term, since it can also refer to any highly vigorous psychological abuse or sharp, caustic psychological attack upon a person or an animal, as Rachel showed before. Moreover, according to Vittorio Buffazzi, and I quote, there are two ways of thinking about violence, in terms of an act of force or in terms of a violation. Defining violence in this dual way broadens the question against urban conflicts, because this could mean that each time there is a violation of human rights, like freedom of thought and expression, or when people starve or are undernourished because of social and political reasons, it is legitimate to consider them as victims of social violence, and it is also legitimate for them to fight back violently. And arguably, this is what takes place in Exarchia, our case study. The preceded theoretical analysis aimed to sketch an argument where violence is deeply connected to the state and power. This is also the case in Exarchia, where states' repressive violence and the resisting violence carried out by individuals and groups are inseparably interlinked. Like the chicken and the egg paradox, the two modes of violence feed each other in a vicious circle. Social violence related to drugs, rape, create a convenient and singular deviant subject in order to justify state violent operations against locals. At the same time, the political ideology of anarchism is being used as a rejection of state power, economic inequality, and structural violence. During the late global economic crisis that hit Greece extremely hard, violence in Exarchia escalated in an unprecedented degree. This fact gave the chance to various scholars to research the phenomenon in relation to the political activism in the crisis situation. I'm going to skip some parts because I'm a bit considerate about time, about how anthropological and sociological analysis of what is happening in Exarchia and in the various instances take place there in order to save some time. I have 10 minutes. Okay. Okay. Um, So various Greek intellectuals that most identify themselves as being radical and leftist background, this is a quote, have attempted to oppose to Leviathan's narrative of dominant political forces and social science, to classify these events as moments of disorder produced by small groups of troublemakers to be repressed and condemned to oblivion, end of quote. For example, scholars like Nicholas Apophis and Adonius Vradis have made various ethnographic and anthropological studies that explore the concentration of mass violence in Exarchia as the spatial articulation of a certain form of consensus between Greek authorities and their subjects, by exposing patterns of occurrence of these instances through time. Moreover, Iossifidis discussed the importance of annual coming together on sites of uprising that create meaningful intergenerational spaces of encounter, a time for reflection and sharing discontinuous histories of resistance, oppression, and solidarity, what he calls space of transition. Moreover, Roman Gerodimos has also identified populism as the ideological basis of far-left extremism in the work of exposing the links and logical pathways between blame, victimhood, and violent revenge. And the question comes again, why all this is happening to this particular neighborhood, Exarchia, and not in any other neighborhoods in Athens? In order to answer this question, one needs to know the urban development of Athens in the 19th century. In a previous extensive publication, I have tried to present the urban development of this neighborhood, but due to the lack of time here, I can only sketch a very brief outline. For those who are not well acquainted with Greece's recent history, it should be noted that modern Athens, despite its famous ancient historical roots, is a relatively new city that emerged from what it was at that point a big village after the Greek Revolution against the Ottoman Empire. Athens in 1833 was designed anew according to the predominant neoclassical views that had prevailed in the early 19th century, that came in the country together with the new Bavarian king that was appointed by the great powers of the time. Architects Cleanthes and Schaubert were commissioned to prepare a plan for the new city that laid the foundations of the urban development of Athens. Its basic idea proposed an isosceles triangle whose median would be heading north from Acropolis. So I just shifted. This is Acropolis, and you can see the triangle. In the beginning, this was supposed to be the palace, but things changed later on. Exarchia, our case study, started to develop outside the neoclassical city from the early 1840s, housing the people, and this is the area what later became Exarchia. It was actually housing the people who worked in the big construction sites of the new neoclassical buildings of Athens. Not being able to afford the house inside the planned part of the city, these workers and their families illegally started to build self-made homes. Just outside the boundary of the new city, creating thus a suburb that was named Proastio Neapolis, translated as side city or new town. The irregularity of this first neighborhood survives still today in the urban pattern of an elongated rectangular, this area, you can see the weird patterns there that are still present. When the municipality of the time decided to take action, it could do nothing but adjust the original plan in order to incorporate the irregularity of the streets. Exarchia thus became the center of an urban conflict and political haggling between the first illegal buildings and the official city plan. Moreover, the university buildings that were built very close helped into transforming the area into a bohemian neighborhood that soon started causing problems to the state by setting a progressive political agenda that never stopped being active. This is a huge demonstration against the military junta that we had in late 60s and 70s. That actually, this is the School of Architecture that really helped into the finishing of the military regime of that time. So here I would like to propose a schema that distinguishes between two different modes of urban development. The first one is a drawing board approach to the design of the city that comes to be applied on the urban fabric. Cleanthes and Schauber's triangular initial plan of Athens was based upon a view from above. Actually, this is not the original plan. This is the first representation that we have of the area by a French mapper. And you can see the way that it silenced all the irregularity that existed at that time. Oh, I have to rush. And one should keep in mind similar cases that were happening at the same time, like that of Osman, violent interventions in the city of Paris that were happening, trying to control revolutionary movements of the time. The second refers to the spontaneous way of developing the area of Exarchia by the dwellers of the neighborhood. In this case, there is no mastermind behind its creation. It was created gradually and collectively by the inhabitants themselves. There is no exterior point of view that explains its pattern. It was built from the inside. People created the city based on adaptation in the existing landscape and the tactile appropriation of the environment and microtopography. And the vicious circle of violence goes on. And I'm heading towards conclusions. So, as I already mentioned, my watch is ahead. So, as I already mentioned, in our days, there is a new chapter of violence taking place right now in the violent play of Exarchia. After the artists came during the document exhibition of 2018, a new metro line and a metro station that is currently being built in the central square of Exarchia challenges once again the peace of the city. Although people in every other neighborhood that the metro line would pass by were happy for the convenience of having such a means of transportation, in Exarchia this is not the case. Even the first plans found a lot of local inhabitants and various intellectuals preparing for war. The reason is that they see this act not as a technical urban infrastructure, but as a state strategic blow in order to annihilate the political character of the neighborhood, with the prices of the properties going up. Less and less working class people, students, and poor intellectuals will be able to actually dwell in the neighborhood. Gentrification becomes thus the Trojan horse, the silent and peaceful war machine that can cunningly win the war from the inside. This time, though, the state does not have its post-capitalist war machine to work alone. More than 50 police officers guard night and day the construction site in order to prevent violent acts of resistance, while more and more hipster cafes and restaurants open around the square. And so far, it has succeeded. It is the disproportional size of power and violence that brings the enormous Leviathan back in the field. Hobbes choice of naming his book Leviathan and Behemoth, his books, are not a coincidence. According to the biblical tradition, and we are in the right place to discuss that, the two monsters appear in the book of Job, which actually puts an emphasis on the suffering of the righteous. The two monsters will fight continuously until the day of reckoning, where the last judgment will take place. So a new question arises. Until that time, what is the role that we, as intellectuals, have to play in this violent struggle? Do we choose a side to fight with, or do we stand outside the strife like the ultimate creator? Traditionally, to speak for my discipline, architects and urban planners have very often taken the side of Leviathan, enclosing space and forcing plans in a top-down approach. More and more lately, though, bottom-up approaches try to open up the discourse. These voices ask to see the city as a more open system, which does not ought to be characterized by formal coherence, that consists of chance events, mutating forms, elements that cannot be homogenized and are not interchangeable. What is left to be seen is whether a little David will appear in this war to wave his sling and challenge the size of his enemy, continuing thus the circle of violence in order to bring justice, as Heraclitus would ask for. And again, as some of the previous speakers suggested, this strife that Heraclitus asked for can be without violence or non-violent, like that Mahatma Gandhi went for. But again, is this actually a one-man show or an act of collective resistance? Thank you very much.